You know, it's difficult to understand the science of acting because acting is so much more than a science. And to understand that, you have to look no further than the career of Richard Gere. Now, in the past, I've perhaps simplified the way in which Richard Gere conveys emotions. I've said that he basically just blinks, drops his head, and exhales. And yet, because there's a new Richard Gere movie out in the cinemas at the moment, I've been thinking about it, and actually, it's so much more complicated than that. Let me show you with the aid of a graph. You see, blinking and breathing are indeed two of the B's in Richard's repertoire. B, B, but what's the third B? That's right. It's blinking, breathing, and buns. Those are the three key elements which make up a perfect Richard Gere performance. Let's have a look back over his career and see the evolution of his method. Start with Looking for Mr Goodbar. It's a small role, and he does some blinking, a little bit. Let's give him 3 out of 10 for the blinking there. Breathing, well, there's definitely one very heavy breathing sequence, so that's probably a 7. But most importantly, the scene when Richard dances around wearing nothing but a jockstrap, waving around an illuminous dagger. That has a 10 rating on the bunzometer. Moving on from that success, he goes on to a starring role in American Gigolo. Now, by this point, he's really got the blinking down pat. He's blinking at about a 5 or a 6 when we get to American Gigolo. The breathing has gone down somewhat. He's containing it except in the scene when he's confronted from behind bars. There is some heavy breathing in that, but nothing to match Mr Goodbar. That would probably be a 6 as well. But my oh my, do we get to see Richard's buns. Once again, it's a 10. Now, as you can see, at this point, he's concentrating more on the lower region of his performance than the upper region. But that's all going to change with An Officer and a Gentleman, the film which in many ways has come to define Richard's acting. Because in An Officer and a Gentleman, he learns that it's possible to act from the waist up. You remember that key scene when he tells the drill sergeant that he has nowhere else to go. How does he do it? Well, firstly, there's a lot of breathing. And then he says, I got nowhere else to go. I got nowhere else to go. Look at that. I'd say that's a 10 on the blinking, a 10 on the breathing. Now, do we get buns? Well, there is some bun action, but not as much as perhaps one would hope. I'd say it's around about an 8 or a 9. And then we come to the perfect Richard Gere performance, the one which so many people overlook. Richard Gere's remake of Breathless, à bout de souffle, as retold by Richard Gere and director Jim McBride. Now, many people look on this as a flawed adaptation. I think it's actually better than the original, and here's why. Because in one key scene, Richard gives us 10s all the way across the board. Remember the sequence when he's had an argument with Valerie Kaprisky. She goes off into the shower. He's concerned. He's troubled. He starts to hyperventilate. He starts to blink. Then he starts to sing. He starts to sing Elvis Presley's Suspicious Minds whilst taking his clothes off in order that he may burst into the shower and sing Suspicious Minds to Valerie Kaprisky whilst showing off his buns and blinking and exhaling at the same time. It's a top 10 across the board. 10, 10, 10. Blinking, breathing, buns. Now, some of you may ask, where does that leave us today with Richard Gere?
Whoa! Go to work, so go ahead, go on home. Hachi, what are you doing here? You been here all day?
Richard is obviously in a later period of his life now when he's not quite so keen to get his kecks off, but the 3 B's rule still applies. Let's have a look at how it works in Hachi. Well, firstly, blinking. Now, obviously, Richard is older than before, so he can't blink with quite the enthusiasm and rapidity of his younger self, but there's still round about a 6 or a 7 on the blinking scale for Hachi, A Dog's Life. Breathing? Well, a scene in which Richard suffers a medical emergency really foregrounds his top breathing skills. I haven't seen breathing that good since An Officer and a Gentleman. That scores a 10. But Mark, I hear you say, what about the buns? Surely there's no buns in Hachi, A Dog's Life. No, but there are still 3 B's, because Richard has grown, Richard has developed, and now it's blinking, breathing, and Buddhism. That's right. It's 10 out of 10 for Buddhism for Hachi, A Dog's Life. A story about this life and the next life. Now, it is true that at other points in his career, Richard has explored other areas. The T column, for example, is the trumpet playing that he did in the Cotton Club. The C and B is the crown and beard that he experimented with in King David. But none of these are crucial. The 3 Bs remain unchanged. So the next time you see a Richard Gere movie, join me in this little practice. When he blinks, smile. When he breathes, cheer. And when he shows you his buns or his Buddhism, take a moment to reflect, because that's what it's really all about.